Good morning, everyone. Hope you enjoyed our amazing panel that kicked off this symposium today. I am Dr. Candace Alfred Weber. I serve as Chief of Partnerships at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. It is my privilege to welcome you to the first workshop of the day. And so, before we dive in, just a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth experience. You can chat with our speaker and myself in the chat box. If you're having any tech problems, feel free to chat me. If you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box. And so we will have time for Q&A at the end, so don't hesitate to just add your questions as we go along throughout the session. And so let's get into the session. This morning, we are joined by Anna Williamson. I know you have access to her bio, so I'm just going to give the highlights. But she is the Chief Program Officer at Agenda for Children. If you are not familiar with Agenda for Children, it is a 40-year-old child advocacy organization that works at the intersection of research, policy, and practice to advance a unified approach to improve the lives of young children, their families, and the early childhood systems that support them. She brings over 20 years of experience in education, nonprofits, foundations, and schools. Her previous roles include serving as a school administrator in Houston, and she's held leadership positions at City Bridge Foundation and First Book in Washington, D.C., where she worked to strengthen public education and build national partnerships. Anna holds a master's degree from the George Washington University and has served on numerous local and national advisory boards. She's also a former Pritzker Fellow, representing Agenda for Children's work in the early childhood policy and systems building at the national level. I am grateful to call her friend, colleague, amazing thought partner. She is nothing short of amazing. So without further ado, Anna, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Candace. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. It's Friday. You have made it. Welcome to today. I'm so excited that you have decided to join this session. We will hopefully make this easy and dynamic and interesting so that you walk away with things that you have learned or that you want to learn more about. This morning, for the next 40 minutes, we'll talk about early intervention and particularly why early intervention services, comprehensive services for infants and toddlers in particular, make a really big impact now and later. Before we dive in, tell me about yourselves. You're going to put it in the chat box, and I think Candace is going to help sort of read off. I'd love to know where you're from. Are you in the state of Louisiana? What part? What is your role? Are you a caregiver? Are you a teacher? Are you a early care and learning provider, maybe a policymaker or an advocate? And why is this topic of interest? I'm really curious about that. So if you'll put that in the chat box, Candace will sort of be our Vanna since I'm not able to see them, and we'll read off some of them so we can see where you're from and what you're up to. Do we have shy folks, Candace?
Yes. Oh, it's coming in now. All right. So I see Julie Burke, New Orleans, Louisiana Childhood Adversity Resilience Educator. So with the CARE Network, which was formerly the Educator Program. I see we have Louise Logan from Lafayette, a CASA volunteer,
Welcome.
Anna Cambry, another New Orleans. I lost my play there. Coming in fast now. Children's admin for Aetna, Better Health of Louisiana. I
Great.
see Chandrell from Slimsboro. She's a family childcare provider. Welcome.
Yeah.
Corey Thomas Fontenot. She is a supervisor for Parents as Teacher Home Visiting Program across Region 2. That's in Baton Rouge.
Awesome.
Kelsey Moeller from Ruston, Louisiana Tech University. Hello.
See, I was just with you on Wednesday. Hi, friend. All
Yes.
right.
All right. We have Jordan Howard, Louisiana Policy Institute for Children in Zachary. She's our GoFar project director.
Oh, great.
Tiffany Williams, New Orleans, project coordinator for LDH and educator.
Great.
Kim Duncan, she's from Louisiana. She works for CCR&R, NSU, and how we can improve early interventions.
Great.
Um, Patty B, I do not want to butcher your last name, but she's in public health. She's a nurse consultant, and part of her work focuses on ensuring linkage to early intervention when risk is identified through screening.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you.
Yep.
That is so great. So we've got folks from everywhere. I am laughing because Kelsey and I were at an event on Wednesday hosted by Policy Institute, and we sat at the same table. So my new friend from Reston is here. I won't go too deep into this, but because Candace already did such a lovely job of introducing me. Again, my name is Anna Williamson. I am the Chief Program Officer here at Agenda for Children in New Orleans. I am originally from Houston, although my Louisiana bred parents continue to say to this day that this was by accident. Most of our family base is in Baton Rouge and in the New Orleans area, so this place is definitely home to me. Like Candace said, I worked in DC for many years. I worked in the private family foundation world and in the education space, and then went back to school at slightly later age to get my master's in early childhood and human development. And I went back to working in schools. So I was an early interventionist. I was a teacher of pre-K 4 for 1 year. I couldn't cut it. It's too hard. So kudos to any teachers out there or former teachers. And then I wanted to return to really working at the systems level of education and predominantly early childhood education. And so that's how I made my way here to Agenda for Children. So quick overview of today's session. So we will discuss early brain development. If you're not already experts with everyone I just heard, you probably are, but we're going to go deeper into brain development, what happens in the brain in those first 3 years. We're going to discuss why early intervention across all domains. So speaking of development, developmental domains, as well as medical, why early intervention is so critical during the first 3 years, particularly for our most vulnerable populations. And I'll share more about our program here in New Orleans, our City Seats program, and specifically touch on the comprehensive wraparound model we created for the children and families in this program. And then hopefully we'll have some minutes where we can actually have questions, dialogue, and then connect if you want to learn more, or if I can be of help afterwards. Okay, so as Candace said, Agenda for Children, we are a 41-year-old nonprofit based here in New Orleans. We work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice, predominantly in early childhood. We are actually the producers of the Kids Count data book. So every state has a Kids Count data book that really gives all statistics about the well-being and health across systems for children birth through 18, and we produce that one. We do work across 11 parishes. So it sounds like everyone on this call is from Louisiana, you know our parishes. We focus on the southeastern part of Louisiana in our work. But today we're going to be focusing predominantly on the work we do in New Orleans specifically. Okay, we work generally across 3 areas. Everyone who I heard in the chat box, I know you wear many hats. We do too at Agenda for Children, but I'm going to go through some of the bigger areas that we work in. We work to increase access to high quality early learning opportunities for children and families in need. We work to improve the quality of the opportunities that children and caregivers have through our coaching and our professional development. We connect teachers, children, families, and providers to resources to help them ensure that children can thrive. And as you heard me say before, we also provide data and research to those in positions of making either policy decisions or advocating on behalf of children and the vital programs that serve them and their families. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's start with the basics. A lot is happening in here. None of you that I heard will be unfamiliar to this. We know that both genes and experiences shape a developing brain, right? They both have to come together to shape a developing brain. And that the most active period of brain development for establishing neural connections is the first 3 years of a child's life. So as this picture, excuse me, shows you that in fact 90% of a child's brain happens before the age of 5, which is huge. And we have overwhelming evidence of how much the brain develops during the first few years of life and how critical this time period is for creating healthy brains and to support changes in the brain when changes are necessary. So you may have seen this image before, maybe many times or maybe not at all. These are images of the synapses in the brain that are formed over the course of a person's life. So you see the newborn at the far left, 1 month, 9 months, 2 years, and the synapses in an adult brain. What are synapses? Synapses are the connections in the brain that allow neurons to talk to one another. What are neurons? Neurons are the cells that actually allow you to do everything, allow you to think, allow you to breathe, the cells that allow you to talk at some point and walk. So when a baby is born, and I'll take my new baby niece, when she was born, she's just a small portion of these connections that will later develop. But as her parents, as my cousins and her caregivers and her teachers talk with her, engage with her, sing to her, feed to her, comfort her when she's upset, my niece's neurons are going to build trillions of connections over time. And the important thing to note here is that as she grows and as she develops, if these connections aren't reinforced or aren't used, they're going to die off. So if you look at the graph where you see 2 years and the image and see 2 years versus the adult, you can see that there are more synapses in the 2-year-old brain versus the adult brain. And this is where that phrase, use it or lose it, really comes from, right? If you don't reinforce it over time, those synapses will fall off and you will lose that skill. So let's go deeper into sort of the synapses that are founded early on, right? What does this development actually look like? So at first we have the sensory pathways. You see in this image that we've got the yellow curve on this graph. That's when the synapses like hearing and vision are forming. And then we move on to the blue, which is the language skills. So that's when the language skills begin to develop. And then finally, you see that red curve, and that's when our higher cognitive functions are starting to take shape, okay? That pink box in the middle, it's the first year. Look at all of the activity that is taking place in the first year. That's remarkable to me. It never ceases to amaze me. So this does not mean that our brains don't continue to develop, right? In fact, we know that our brain development is not actually truly complete until our mid-20s. Some researchers even say now our mid-30s, which is slightly frightening to me. So if you are at home and you're questioning the decisions of your 20-year-old son, maybe, this could very well be the reason he keeps making those poor decisions that are driving you insane. I guess though, if you're questioning the decisions of your 60-year-old spouse or partner, this development is not going to be helpful at all. They're a lost cause. And child development path. We know that while every child develops differently at their own pace, right? So if you have more than one child, you can say, oh my God, my son didn't do this until 6 months after his sister. We know that everyone develops at their own pace. But we do have strong evidence that informs us that most children follow a fairly sequential developmental journey, right? So we know that most healthy babies around 4 to 6 months old are going to roll over, and then you think it's so cute and fun until you can't leave them anywhere because they're going to fall off. And then it's a nightmare. And then they're going to sit up. They're going to make those cooing sounds that are so cute. And then the babbling sounds, particularly when they are having a conversation, a back and forth exchange with a caregiver, a parent, a teacher, a grandparent, a babysitter. It's what we like to say, that's a serve and return, right? The baby makes a sound, you make a sound, the baby babbles, you babble and imitate that sound, that serve and return. We know that most typically developing children will take their first steps between 12 and 16 months. And around between 2 and 3, they're going to start to put words together. So they might use 2 or even 3 word phrases to express what they want, what they need. They're going to label things. Again, each of our kids are going to do this on their own timeline, but they tend to hit milestones around the same time as their same age peers who are developing typically. I First of all, I love this little boy. And second of all, I learned of this quote years ago. I think I was in grad school, and it seems to describe to me perfectly the significance of the development of a brain in the earliest days, weeks, months, and years. It says the experiences we have in our earliest years affect the architecture of the brain in ways that our later experiences simply do not. Now, that doesn't mean that later experiences aren't really critical and important, both positive and negative. But it means that in our earliest days, when a child is born up until particularly the age of 3, those experiences that that child, that infant and toddler are having, again, whether they're negative or they're positive, that is going to affect the architecture of the brain in a way that's going to be drastically different and more than, say, a 6th grader who's going to have a new experience. So if you're an early childhood teacher, and I think there were some on, you may have heard people say that you're brain architects. Has anyone heard that? It's a phrase and a title that caught on, I think several years ago, and I'm so for it. I love when people say, oh, I'm a brain architect, or my teachers are brain architects, because it is actually very true. This is very true indeed. So now we know that the brain has considerable ability to take in information, right? To wire itself, to change during the first few years of life. But our key changes become considerably harder with every year as we age. So this graph shows this reality. At the bottom, you can see the age range between 2 years and 70. So on the left-hand side, you see the blue or the green or turquoise curve. It shows the brain's ability to change in response to experiences. It's extremely high at the age of 2, and it's very low at the age of 70. And then on the right side, you see the orange, right? That orange curve, and it shows the amount of effort that this change actually requires. So again, it's the amount of effort someone's going to have to use at the age of 2 is drastically different and less than the amount of effort you're going to have to do at the age of 40, 50, 60, 70. Has anyone experienced this themselves? I will say, has anyone tried to learn a language at an older age or a skill set at an older age, like riding a bike? It's much harder. I was the one that at 40 went to Paris for the first time, thought this is the most amazing experience. I should really go home, learn French, and then maybe move back, maybe come back, right? And so I thought, well, I took Spanish in high school and college. I studied abroad. I probably could learn French at this age. So I signed up for some group classes with a bunch of 20-year-olds, and it was drastically shocking and embarrassing to me within the first 5 minutes that I was likely not going to be picking up French, maybe at all, and definitely not at the same pace as my 22-year-old peers in that class. So I never moved back. I never moved to France. So that's the story. But it's not impossible to change these abilities. It's not impossible to develop these skills later on. It just becomes considerably harder as we age, right? And we have an understanding of what typical development looks like and how much harder it is for one to learn things as they age. But what about the young kids who we are working with who show red flags, right? Particularly our children who have significant barriers. So many of you noted in your sort of intros that you work with different populations of children. So I imagine that many of you work directly with or on behalf of children who are experiencing barriers, right? And by barriers, I mean they have food insecurity, they've experienced trauma, they may have a parent with an addiction, maybe they're homeless, they were born with a disease, maybe they were born with something like cerebral palsy or a brain injury. Or maybe they were born premature. All of these things are barriers to a child's development, right? And then that's when you start to see the red flags even more. So the more vulnerable our children are, the more likely it is that they may need additional support and resources early on to support their development over time. This is, I think, the most interesting part of early development to me. I just think it's astounding. Our youngest kiddos who are the most vulnerable to negative experiences, like the ones I just mentioned, they are at the same time the most responsive to positive interactions and appropriate interventions. That is fascinating, right? So that means that every caregiver, every teacher, every parent, every grandparent, every babysitter has the power to make considerably positive impacts when interacting with our infants and toddlers. So the neuroplasticity of early childhood makes children incredibly vulnerable, but also incredibly resilient and responsive to positive interaction. That means that we have a great responsibility and a great power to change the trajectory of our infants and toddlers for life. So we have highlighted how significant our role is as caregivers, right? Whether you're a teacher on this call, an advocate, a provider. But let me pause for just a second and seem like I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a second. So as an early interventionist, I have always been particularly interested in a young child's language skills, right? Their communication skills. And it has always fascinated me as an educator to see how alert and sensitive many of the parents I interact with and some educators are to physical development, right? Standing, walking, writing, all of these physical things. If you're teachers or providers, you might have seen this too, right? We have parents who are constantly asking, like, when will my child walk? When will my child be able to write? When will my child be able to do this? But overall, I haven't had many parents seem as concerned about the language development of their infant and toddler, right? I hear very few who are saying, "My gosh, my 6-month-old really isn't making sounds." And that's for a number of reasons. And I find that many caregivers don't recognize how closely connected our early language skills are and the importance of the exposure to language to literacy and academic skills developed a few years down the line. And language and communication are areas of development that are representative of other barriers an infant or toddler may face, right? So if we have a 2-year-old, they're probably not going to have a diagnosis of autism. That might come much later. But I can guarantee you that their teachers and their parents and caregivers will start to see signs, if they're looking, that communication is different. Their language abilities are different. And again, so that doesn't necessarily mean it's autism, but it does show very early on a flag that could be linked later to a developmental or an academic delay or concern that needs to be addressed. And language and communication are one of those uncanny innate skills that humans almost is the key word here, almost always naturally pick up as infants. This is universal. It's across all languages, across all countries. They pick it up as infants. But the exposure to language is what is absolutely key. So we know that the amount of language spoken and the quality of that language spoken to the child greatly influence later developmental and academic skills. So let's look at a slide. I put spot the difference. Let's look at this slide. On the left, there are 2 pictures, right? On the left, you see what looks to be either a mother or a grandmother or a caregiver, a teacher maybe, who is speaking to an infant, or at least making sounds, right? She's engaged, she's animated, she's making eye contact. It seems like she's probably making sounds and the baby's making sounds. So she's doing that back and forth exchange we talked about. There is so much that is happening in this baby's brain from this one simple interaction. This type of interaction is activating multiple areas of this cute baby's brain, not just the language synapses that we talked about, but it's activating social, emotional, it's activating the sensory synapses, that hearing and even vision, right? So much is happening from this simple exchange that probably took a few minutes. Now on the right, you see a picture of a bouncer. It has a baby in it, and it has, you can't tell, but it's an iPad attachment. Now, We don't fully know, researchers don't fully know the lasting effects of digital influences on young children, right? And by no means am I trying to get into the digital debate or shame any parent who lets their young child play on the iPhone or tablet while they're trying to cook, they're trying to clean, they're trying to go to the grocery store, or you're just trying to survive. I totally get it. But we do know, as Dr. Elliott points in her book, that young children can begin to make sense of language only when it refers to something they can directly relate to. Meaning, we know that exposure to language only has the real benefit for that brain development when it is language spoken by a real person directly to an infant and toddler, not around that toddler, right? Not me saying, screaming over the head of one child to the next, saying, talking to, that is actually not developing in the brain, right? Not around the child, not from a TV, not from a game on an iPad, not even from the phone. It's directly to the child from a caregiver in person. So again, if you haven't read and you have any interest in infant and brain development, I love Dr. Elliott's book, What's Going On in There. It's a really great book. And so again, just to reinforce, a baby can begin to make sense of language only when it refers to something she can directly relate to. So we've talked about what happens in an infant or toddler's brain and how important exposure is to a child's development, right? We actually have to expose them to all of these things for their brain to really develop the way it should. And we've examined why real life barriers can increase a young child's vulnerability to developmental delays or diagnoses, right? So those barriers we talked about earlier. And you also allowed me to kind of go off on my tangent and highlight the sincere importance of directly interacting and communicating with our infants and toddlers and the power you have there. So now let's get into sort of the community benefits of early intervention. For children at significant risk, early intervention can serve as a protective barrier against multiple adverse influences that may hinder their developmental progress, right? And it has an economic benefit too. So if we have policymakers on this call, we have the National Early Intervention Longitudinal Study that found that 42% of young children served did not need special education by the time they reached kindergarten as a result of those early intervention services. 42%, that's not nothing. That's a pretty remarkable statistic. And then lastly, from a dollar perspective, right? Money's tight everywhere. And so we always have to look at what is that economic return? JAMA, or the Journal of the American Medical Association, found that for every $1 invested in early intervention services, society saw a $7 return compared to around a $1 return on services delivered in the second or third grade. Now, does this mean we stop intervening and providing services for our kids at 7, 10, 15? No, of course not. That's wild. That's crazy. But it does give us evidence that early intervention services can have such a huge payoff and is worth the time, the money, and the effort that's required to do it well. So how are we doing here at home? It sounds like everyone was from Louisiana. Unfortunately, we know that we are underserving our infants and toddlers in Louisiana. We just are. And this is for a number of different reasons that requires an entirely different session and conference probably. In 2023 in Louisiana, only around 3 to 5% of our children under the age of 3 received early intervention services through IDEA Part C. Our national average is 7%. So we do know that we are underserving our children. IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Act, ensures that a free, appropriate public education and related services are available for eligible children with disabilities. And then when we talk about Part C, which it sounds like many of you are familiar with, Part C provides the funding and the guidelines and the resources for a system of early intervention services for our infants and our toddlers from birth to through age 3, so 30 to age 3, 36 months, with disabilities and their families. So let's talk about a local approach we have going on here in New Orleans. We have what's called a City Seats program. It's a municipally funded program that provides free, year-round, high-quality early childhood education. to low-income families with young children. So it serves birth to 3 years old in Orleans Parish specifically. And it was created almost 10 years ago now, around 7 years ago. No, longer than that, with three goals in mind. One is to increase access to early learning for those with the greatest need. Two, we want to improve the overall quality of participating early learning centers. And three, and what I think is most relevant for this topic in particular, is to ensure that our children and their families have access to all of the support and the early interventions they need to participate fully in an early care program. So our program was designed after Early Head Start. And the idea was that we want to go beyond typical classroom opportunities and provide comprehensive services to address mental, medical, and developmental health, and also to provide access to more social services and resources. So in addition to what we do at Agenda, so Agenda, as I mentioned earlier, provides coaching and professional development. So we have a very specific targeted coaching and PD program for our centers, our teachers, our providers who are participating in the City Seats program. We have about 40 of those in New Orleans this year. But in addition to that, we have two really important wraparound partners that have become sort of an integral part to the City Seats wraparound comprehensive services. One is our partnership with Tulane Mental Health Consultations, or TMIC. It sounds like everyone on this call knows who they are. They're wonderful. They go in and provide infant mental health consultations and sort of coaching around in our centers, in particular in classrooms where we see some concerns that we have with our infants and toddlers related to behaviors or other mental health challenges. And then what we'll talk more about for the remainder of this discussion is the partnership we have with Manning Family Children's Hospital. And this actually includes a comprehensive care team of more than 10 specialists. So we'll go deeper into this, but we have nurses as part of this comprehensive care team. We have early interventionists, we have social workers, we have a third of a time of a pediatrician. And we actually this year, at the end of last year, put together where we actually have spots available with a developmental pediatrician. So if there are concerns around kids who need a full evaluation, whether it's because of some developmental concerns we have, whether there's a concern around autism, we do have a specific amount of opportunity to send kids to sort of fast track to that developmental pediatrician who does those evaluations. And, I think it is probably some of the most innovative work we're doing is our partnership with Manning Family Children's. And I want to share sort of the impetus for this because I think it's an example of how we've tried to evolve this program to meet the needs of our kids and our families and the teachers and providers that are participating. So this partnership was really born out of a simple need we had to support a very medically fragile child who was enrolled in City Seats. Our little girl had significant developmental needs. She had significant medical needs. And we didn't have any medical interventions at that time. We didn't have any support in the program. And if you're in early childhood, you don't have nurses in your programs because centers of early childhood don't have nurses or social workers or others in their programs unless they're part of the Early Head Start or Head Start program, right? So we're not like K-12 that has what I call a luxury. So we started thinking about this, and of course we decided, let's go to our friends at Children's. Like, we've got to figure out how we can possibly support this child and the family outside of early learning, but also in their center. How do we support the teachers and the providers in the center as well? And if you're not familiar, Children's had a program for now a number of years called Thrive Kids. It really is a community-based program that works with educational partners. But and they kind of took off during COVID. They did so many things in partnership with schools, but they had only worked in K through 12. So when we began conversations with them, we really said, we have a need in our birth through 5 space, and particularly our birth through 3 space. And so we had multiple planning discussions. This went on for months, but we were able to create this partnership and this comprehensive care team with the specialists I described earlier using funding from the early childhood millage that was passed in New Orleans in 2022. And this partnership, I must highlight, which is both exciting and also very unfortunate. It continues to be one of the only medical care interventions that is working in early childhood centers across the country. So it's very rare for this to be part of the community. It usually takes place if a partnership happens in a K through 12 space. So some of the services included in City Seats, as we talk about our wraparound services, we're talking about care manage and care coordination. If you have ever either supported a parent or a family who has a child who has a significant medical need or developmental need, you know it takes a lot of coordination. If you've ever been a parent that has a child with a medical need or a significant developmental need, it takes a lot of care coordination, takes a lot of time. And so that was one of the elements that Thrive Kids brought to this work, was really to sort of shepherd this child and this family through the process, whether that be with multiple different doctors and specialists, multiple therapies, social work interventions, etc. Again, I mentioned our incredible partnership with Tulane University for mental health consultations in the classroom. Our Thrive Kids comprehensive care team, like I said, includes social work support, and that includes attendance counseling, right? So in K through 12, you have counselors who are wondering why Anna hasn't shown up to school. You don't have that across multiple centers, right? You might have the center trying to find out, but we actually built in attendance counseling so that we have our social workers call our families. If Anna's been absent for several days, we want to know why. We want to know if there's a medical need, if there's a transportation need, if there's a housing need or a domestic violence need, and we want to be able to intervene if we are able to do so. We do provide clinical services through this partnership. So ages and stages questionnaire, if you're familiar, that screening. And we also provide hearing and visual screenings as well, and then referrals that come along with that if a child is showing a deficiency. Again, intensive developmental support and medical support. So early intervention is a big part of this, as well as medical support. And then, like I mentioned, we have Dr. Duggan, who is a wonderful pediatrician who's assigned to the Thrive Cares team. Thrive Kids team as part of our care, comprehensive care team. And so she really is the medical advisor that's on call. So here's just a general process. So City Seats identification and our intervention process. So first, of course, not surprising to anyone, we're working to identify concerns. And we're doing this more and more now through developmental hearing and vision screenings, right? So that has become a huge game changer for us. But we also will have teachers or providers or even families come to the care coordination team and say, hey, I really have concerns about my child. I have concerns about X, Y, or Z. And then also, like I mentioned, those attendance counseling calls are important. So we find out a lot of needs, whether they're medical or social or developmental, from those attendance counseling calls with our social workers. And then, like usual, we get together, and it's a very large comprehensive care team. Sometimes Tulane is part of that as well. So it's agenda, it's our wraparound partners, it's usually the teachers and the provider as well as the family. And we're looking at what the observations have been at home and in the classroom. What is the antecedent to everything? What's happening there? What are the concerns? We're discussing them, how they might look different at home versus in school. And then we're coordinating on next steps. And again, that really looks different. So sometimes we have a Thrive Kids nurse who's going to be the lead because it's a significant medical need, right? We've had kids with cancer, we've had kids with feeding tubes, etc. Or if it's a developmental question and concern, we might have our early interventionist take the lead of that case. And then, of course, there's the delivery of services and really the PD and training that goes with for our caregivers, for our teachers, and for our families. So we talk about referrals to community resources. We have transportation assistance, safety and medical plans. So again, for those very acute medical needs, mental health supports and consultations, rescreenings, early interventionists, etc. And most of our children, this is something that's become a very important piece, have received a developmental screening. So 100% have received a developmental screening over the last year. 94% received a hearing screening, and 93% received a vision screening. I'm not going to go into data too much. I think there's some that I could unpack a lot, because when we talk about intensive interventions, the numbers sometimes look small and the hours of intervention are considerable. So if you work in early intervention or in any of in medical, you know that it's not always the number of cases, it's the hours of intervention. And directors report a range of early intervention for referrals, right? And as you can see, this is why I go on my soapbox. The number one referral need is related to language, speech, and communication. These are just some quotes. I won't go into too much detail, but one of them is, what I really value about participating in the City Seats program is the comprehensive support it provides for both children and families. Another teacher and leader said the required developmental screenings and support services have helped us identify children's needs much earlier, allowing us to intervene before challenges become more difficult to address. Here's some more quotes. A few personal stories, just because I think this is how it really lands in people's minds. So we had a routine required screening that led to a referral and a diagnosis of a little one. And it would have resulted in complete vision loss if he had not been screened and it was left unchecked. We've had other children, like I said, with really complex medical needs, including a child undergoing cancer treatment and a toddler with hearing and vision loss, unfortunately due to early abuse. And both were able to participate fully and safely in their childcare center and setting because of these interventions. And that's what's most important. So what's next? Refining our social work and our parent support model. That's been something we continue to question. How are we supporting our parents? Are we the all things to them? Are we trying to solve all things related to our families? Or are we trying to focus more on specific development and early childhood education and the understanding of the importance there? So we're continuing to talk, hear from our families, understand what our role could be there. Continuing to do those ASQ trainings for our teachers and leaders, which has been huge in terms of the number of referrals that are increasing. Improve our data systems to better connect our interventions to outcomes and impact across all partners. Continuing to partner and advocate for increased integration between systems and agencies. Pilot smaller scale interventions to see what really works for our high need populations. And continuing to manage all of this amid really shifting financial realities that we're all facing across the state and across the country right now. So our lessons learned, this could be 4 pages, and I would talk about this anytime, any day, because I think this is what has made our program so unique, is the evolution. So our comprehensive care is costly, but it's worthwhile. Capacity building amongst partners takes time, communication, data infrastructure. And like I said, preventative screenings like ASQ are absolutely critical and can be the safety net that our most vulnerable infants and toddlers really need. Okay, as this little one says, presentation finished. Questions?
Awesome, awesome. So I don't see any questions in the chat box yet. But Anna, I do just want to say, just great information. I've been in this space for quite some time, but just the way you navigated or explained to us, just from the brain development, the synapses, and then linking that to just how critical that is in that time period and the early interventions, was just phenomenal. And I don't think I even knew the origin story of
Oh, good.
CSEAT's partnership. So no, that was really great.
Thank you.
All right, nothing in the chat. So I am going to move us forward in interest of time.
Yes,
We'll have access to this presentation. This session is being recorded, but Anna, again, thank you for your expertise.
absolutely. Thank you, Candace.
Absolutely. And thank
Yeah.
you for joining. And so when the Zoom ends, it's going to take you all back into the events lobby. And so you will see a pop-up on the right side of your screen. That is the survey for this session, the post-survey session. And so If you heard me say earlier at the Policy Institute, we love data and we love using data to improve. So please, please, please take that quick survey, which will be about this particular session. Our next session starts at 10:55, and so we are featuring the U.S. Chamber Foundation's discussion on the newly expanded employer child care tax credit at the federal level that came out of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So you don't want to miss that if you can join and hear from the experts there. In the meantime, feel free to hang out in the lobby, network with others. Again, we have over 240 folks registered for this symposium. And so utilize the chat box to chat with each other. You can do it privately or collectively. And at any time, if you have any questions or need any assistance, our support team is here to help. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.
Have a great weekend.
All right, see ya.